My name's Maxine, and I want to tell you about a time in my life that still gives me chills when I think about it. This all happened back in the year 2022. At the time, I was 28 years old, living alone in a small city that I had only moved to because of a job. That job, the one I had moved everything for, ended abruptly. They let me go during a round of layoffs, and I was left stranded in a place I barely knew, trying to figure out what came next. I was broke, frustrated, and desperate to stay busy so I would not spiral into some kind of depression. That was when I decided to try out DoorDash. I had heard people made decent side cash with it, and I figured if nothing else, it would get me out of the apartment for a few hours. So I downloaded the app, got through the sign-up process, and was officially approved to start delivering. But even then, it took me nearly 3 weeks to actually go out and do my first delivery. I kept finding excuses. I was nervous, I guess, scared of the unknown. One particular night, after coming home from a long and uneventful day doing nothing in particular, I found myself bored but too awake to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, then at the DoorDash app on my phone, and finally thought, what the heck, let's give it a go. I grabbed my keys and drove out. The first few deliveries were smooth. Nothing too exciting. I picked up some fast food, dropped it off at a few houses and apartments, and was even surprised by how easy it all felt. The app guided me where I needed to go, the people were polite enough, and I started to feel like maybe I could actually make something out of this. Then came an order that was different. It was about 3 hours into my shift, and the clock had just struck midnight. This delivery popped up with an estimated tip of $35. I remember blinking twice, thinking it must be a glitch or mistake. That tip alone was equal to what I had made the entire night. No hesitation, I hit accept. The order came from a 24-hour McDonald's, the only one in our town, sitting out on the edge of the highway that leads away from the city and into rural farmland. I had always referred to that stretch of road as the beginning of nowhere because it was so isolated. I picked up the food and started the drive, following the directions in the app. Not even 2 minutes into the trip, my phone started ringing. It was the customer. I answered, trying to keep my voice friendly. He sounded older, maybe in his early 30s, and was not in a good mood at all. He told me to double-check the address. I read off what the app said. There was a pause. I asked if that sounded right, but instead of answering, he just hung up. Dead silence. That was the first red flag. Something about his tone, his abruptness, it rubbed me the wrong way. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he had a rough day. But then again, who offers a massive tip and then acts rude? As I drove deeper out of town, that feeling in my gut started to get worse. The road got darker, narrower, and fog began to roll in. Every now and then I passed a lonely mailbox or a flickering porch light way off in the distance. But otherwise it was just fields and fences and the occasional twisted tree. My headlights were the only thing lighting up the road. I remember thinking how far away I felt from everything and everyone. Eventually, my GPS told me to turn off onto a small dirt path. I could barely see where it started because of the fog. I slowed down and turned onto it. The gravel crunched under my tires as I drove slowly through a field filled with tall grass. My headlights lit up only about 10 feet ahead, and everything else was just fog and shadows. After a couple of minutes creeping along, a house finally came into view. It was an old farmhouse, standing all alone in the middle of that field. It had a big wraparound porch, tall wooden windows, and an old, weather-worn exterior. But what really caught my attention were the lights. A few windows were glowing softly from within, and the address on the mailbox matched the one on the app. I had found the place. I parked my car and grabbed the McDonald's bag. I stepped out, immediately struck by how quiet everything was. No bugs, no wind, no distant traffic. Just silence and the sound of my shoes crunching against the dirt as I walked toward the porch. The air felt thick. I got to the front door and knocked. The door creaked open with the first knock. It had not been shut properly. That made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then I heard a voice call out from somewhere deeper inside the house. It was the same man from the phone, asking if I was the delivery driver. I called back, saying yes, and that I would leave the food right there on the porch. But then he responded quickly, asking me to come in and set it down on the kitchen counter. His tone was short, a bit aggressive, but not yelling. Still, it made me hesitate. I took one cautious step inside. The air smelled stale, like old wood and damp carpets. I could feel how uneven the wooden floor was under my shoes. I was about to say something when, suddenly, loud piano music began blaring from the back of the house. I jumped. It was some old, haunting melody that sounded like it belonged in a black and white horror film. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. I called out again, "Sir? Hello?" But there was no reply. Something in my gut screamed that this was wrong. The music, the tone of his voice, the way the door had been left ajar, it all added up to a big pile of nope. I slowly started walking down the hallway, trying to spot the kitchen. But the farther I went, the darker it got. Rooms on either side of the hallway were pitch black. Then, something clicked inside me. I stopped, dropped the bag right there on the floor, and turned around. I had barely taken 2 steps back toward the door when I saw him. He was standing in the shadows just a few feet from the entrance. I had not even heard him move. He was tall, with pale skin and wide eyes that looked like they were glowing in the low light. He was just staring at me, not blinking, not saying anything. I could not see clearly, but I swear there was something in his hand. Something long, but I never got a good look. My heart skipped a beat. I turned and bolted out of there like my life depended on it. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sped back toward the main road, tires sliding a little on the gravel. Looking back, I am convinced that man was trying to trap me inside. That music? It was not for ambience. It was to cover the sound of his footsteps as he crept up behind me. If I had hesitated even 5 more seconds, I might not be here to tell this story. I got home that night, deleted the DoorDash app, and promised myself I would never do that kind of gig again. After what happened that night, I didn't sleep for 2 days. I kept replaying it in my head. Those glowing eyes, the thick silence, that creaking floor, and the echo of that piano music. I wasn't sure if it was just paranoia or if I had really walked into something much worse than I understood. Either way, I was done. I deleted the app, uninstalled it, and didn't look back. But just because I deleted DoorDash didn't mean my financial problems disappeared. I was still jobless and broke, with rent creeping up and no real plan. For weeks I bounced between job boards, temp gigs, and a few shady ads on Craigslist that I didn't even want to open. It felt like I was circling the drain, holding my breath. That's when I got offered a front desk job at a small, privately owned motel just off the highway, same one that passed by that McDonald's. It was 30 minutes outside the city, kind of in the middle of nowhere, but the pay was decent and they didn't require much experience. A place like that doesn't really have a line of applicants. I took the job immediately. My first few days were spent shadowing the owner and learning the basics: check-ins, phone calls, room assignments, emergency contacts. The motel was old school. It didn't use digital key cards or software, just a pegboard behind the desk filled with labeled metal keys and guest slips that were handwritten. It had a faded neon sign, a handful of single-story rooms, and was tucked next to an abandoned restaurant that looked like it hadn't served a burger since the 1980s. There was something eerie about that place, even during the day. The rooms were always dim, like the windows were permanently tinted. A few bulbs flickered no matter how many times they were changed. The hallway that led to the back laundry room was always cold, even in the middle of summer. Still, I was grateful for the job, and most of the guests were truckers or weary travelers passing through. Most barely made eye contact, just tired people looking for a few hours of rest. The motel was nearly always half empty, and the quiet started to feel comforting. That changed on my first full night working the counter alone. It started off uneventful. A few check-ins early in the evening, then the slow trickle of headlights disappearing into their parking spots and doors shutting for the night. Around 9 p.m., a woman rushed in. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week, dark circles under her eyes, jacket wrapped tight around her, and her hands shaking slightly as she reached for her wallet. I greeted her and asked how I could help. She spoke in a hushed voice, asking for a room, fast. She kept looking over her shoulder at the door, like someone was going to burst through it any second. I gave her the key and didn't ask questions. Something about her demeanor warned me not to pry. She muttered a thank you and practically ran to her room. I watched her from behind the desk, wondering what she was running from. An hour passed. The sky outside was pitch black, and the neon sign buzzed faintly in the distance. No new guests, no phone calls, just silence and the faint hum of the vending machine. Then, a man walked in. I didn't see any car pull up, didn't hear any footsteps outside. He was just suddenly there, pushing open the front door like he belonged. He looked to be in his late 30s, dressed neatly enough, but with this strange stillness about him. His eyes were sunken and hollow, like he hadn't blinked in a long time. He approached the counter and asked if there were any rooms available. I said yes, and began to explain the pricing. But before I finished, I noticed his gaze drifting. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes kept sliding over my shoulder, toward the wall behind me. I turned to look. He was staring at the key wall. I asked again if he wanted a room, but he paused, like he had to think about it. Then suddenly he said, "No, that's all right," and turned around to leave. That should have been the end of it. But when I looked through the window, I didn't see him walk to a car. I waited, expecting headlights, an engine starting, something. Nothing. The man had just disappeared into the darkness. Something about that set me on edge. I walked outside, scanned the lot, even looked toward the woods beyond the parking spaces. Nothing. Just the abandoned restaurant, some fog creeping low across the ground, and the wind rattling the motel sign. I went back inside, shut the door, and locked it. About 30 minutes passed, and the phone rang. It jolted me. I had nearly dozed off in the chair behind the desk. I picked it up, and a woman's voice, shaky, whispering, told me there was someone standing outside her door and he wouldn't leave. She didn't say who she was, but I remembered the room number she had checked into. It was the same woman from earlier, the one who had rushed in like she was fleeing something. I grabbed the master key and hurried out, making my way toward her room on the far end. By the time I got there, the walkway was empty. The woman opened her door a crack and peered out at me with frightened eyes. She told me he had been standing there for several minutes, not moving, not speaking, just staring at her door. I asked what he looked like. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. He had really pale skin and these dead-looking eyes, like he wasn't all there. I knew exactly who she meant. I asked if she wanted me to call the police. She shook her head, saying she'd rather not get involved with any of that. She was checking out in the morning and wanted to be left alone. I nodded and promised I'd keep an eye out. But as I stood there in that hallway, looking out into the shadows, I had this terrible feeling wash over me, like something wasn't finished yet. I spent that whole night sitting up in bed, the lights on, my phone clutched in my hands. My heart refused to calm down, and even hours later, my mind kept playing back every step I had taken in that house. I could still hear that eerie piano music in my ears, like it had embedded itself in my memory. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. That man, those eyes, the way he just stood there in the dark. None of that was normal. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was just a weird experience, that maybe I had overreacted. But then I opened the app just to check something, and the order was gone. Not marked complete, not canceled, just wiped from my history like it had never existed. No trace. That scared me more than anything else. I tried to report it, but DoorDash has no real way to handle something like that. I got routed through automated responses, chatbots, and finally an email from someone named Trevor who said they would look into it. I never heard back. That was it. Just silence. Like the whole thing had never happened. A few days later, I started digging around online. I did not know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe some mention of the house, or someone else who had delivered there. I searched the address and even dropped a pin on a map, but something strange came up. The address didn't officially exist. It was listed in the system, sure, but as part of a condemned property that had supposedly burned down more than 10 years ago. There were no active utilities tied to it, no residents listed. I even found a forum thread from back in 2015 where someone mentioned the house and warned people to stay away from it. They said the land was cursed. That was when the gravity of it really hit me. I had walked into a place that was not supposed to be standing. I had spoken to a man who might not even have been alive, or at least not human. I am not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or demons or haunted houses. But after that night, I can't say I do not believe anymore either. I still get chills thinking about how close I was to stepping deeper into that house. If I had walked just a little farther down that hallway or hesitated at the door, maybe he would have grabbed me. Maybe I would have ended up another missing person in a town full of silence. The news would have said I just vanished on a delivery route. No one would have ever found me. Since that night, I have never done another food delivery. I found work at a small bookstore downtown. It pays less, sure, but it is safe. It is surrounded by people. There are lights, customers, laughter. No strange phone calls, no abandoned addresses, no pale-eyed strangers standing in doorways. But every now and then, Late at night, I think about going back. Not because I would never actually do it, but because a part of me still wonders what would have happened if I had stayed in that house. If I had followed the music. If I had asked him what was in his hand. And whenever I feel that curiosity creeping in, I remind myself, some doors are not meant to be opened. Some houses, no matter how real they look, are not part of our world anymore. And sometimes, when you answer the wrong knock, you do not get a second chance to walk away.